I was in a hospital bed, barely breathing from pneumonia, when my own brother walked in, accused me of faking it for money, and then unplugged my oxygen. I nearly died while he stood there watching. But what he didn't know, that single moment triggered a chain of evidence that would destroy his entire life. This isn't just betrayal, it's attempted murder, and the fallout was brutal. The sterile metallic tang of the hospital air still clings to my clothes even now, weeks later. It's a phantom scent, mingling with the faint, comforting aroma of Grandpa's old leather armchair, where I'm currently slumped. The worn fabric, a stark contrast to the unforgiving plastic of recovery rooms. My chest still feels tight, not from lingering respiratory issues, but from a persistent crushing weight, a phantom pressure that mimics the absence of air, a chilling reminder of the moment a familiar hand, a brother's hand, reached out and methodically, deliberately detached the lifeline that was feeding oxygen into my starved lungs. I can still hear the faint hiss of escaping gas, a sound swallowed instantly by the roaring alarm bells that began to clang not in the room but inside my own head, a desperate internal cacophony as the world began to grey at the edges. I know what you're thinking. Your brother? Really? Believe me, I wouldn't have believed it either. Not fully, not deep down, even with years of microaggressions and veiled threats. You see, when you're constantly subjected to what I now understand as a pervasive pattern of reactive abuse, where every reaction you have to their provocations is then weaponized against you, your sense of reality warps. He always had this uncanny ability to make me feel like I was the dramatic one, the overly sensitive one, the one causing the problems. It's a classic manifestation of the golden child dynamic, isn't it? He was the sun around which our family revolved. Especially after my parents divorced and Grandpa, bless his heart, tried to fill the void, but always, always with my brother Mark as the shining example, the prodigy, the one who could do no wrong. I was the shadow, the afterthought, the convenient scapegoat. That hospital room, with its sickly pale green walls and the incessant, hushed beeping of monitors that punctuated the silence, became my personal hell. I was there, recovering from a sudden, severe bout of pneumonia, something that had ravaged my lungs and left me tethered to the oxygen concentrator, its gentle, rhythmic hum a constant companion. It was just after visiting hours, the twilight hour, when the nurses were changing shifts, a brief, chaotic window of vulnerability. Mark had slipped back in, ostensibly to retrieve a book he'd forgotten. The room was quiet, save for my own ragged breathing and the machine's steady whir. I remember his eyes, a strange, cold calculation in them, devoid of the usual bluster. He stood there, by the bed, for what felt like an eternity, watching me, his gaze lingering on the clear plastic cannula beneath my nose. I had this immediate, visceral sense of dread, a primal instinct screaming danger. But then he smiled, a thin, almost apologetic smile, and said, "Still milking it, huh? You always were one for theatrics, weren't you, na?" Voice was a raspy whisper, a struggle against the fatigue. "Mark, what are you talking about? I'm sick." He took a step closer, the scent of his cloying cologne, something cheap and sweet, filling my nostrils. "Sick? Or just looking for attention? Grandpa's health isn't great. You pull this stunt, he feels bad for you, maybe changes his will. It's always been about the money with you, hasn't it?" He gestured dismissively at the oxygen tube. "This little prop? Mark, that's insane. I can barely breathe. They said I almost. They said it was serious." My chest was already tightening at his words, a panic starting to bloom. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, I'm sure they did. They always do. You were the one who broke Dad's prize antique clock, remember? And blamed it on the cat? The cat. Grandpa still brings it up. And then that time you sprained your ankle before the school play so you wouldn't have to go on stage. You were just scared of failing. You always find a way out, don't you? Always playing the victim." My heart rate monitor, a small, unobtrusive device, started to pick up speed. I could feel the tremor in my hands. I was 7, Mark, and the cat did knock it over. And I didn't sprain my ankle, I actually broke it. I still have the scar. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his breath stale. Yeah, yeah, sure. Just like you're sick now. Honestly, you're pathetic. You just want Grandpa's sympathy vote before he goes. And you think this little performance is going to work after everything I've done for him? The weekends I spent driving him to appointments, the calls, while you were off living your big important life? He paused, his eyes narrowing. You know, I always wondered how much of your little maladies were real. You always seemed to recover awfully fast, didn't you? Like that asthma attack during our summer camp hike? The one where you got to ride in the ranger's jeep while I had to carry all the packs myself. You got a chocolate bar for being so brave. I got blisters. This wasn't just gaslighting. It was an archaeological dig into every past grievance, real or imagined, twisted into a narrative of my perpetual manipulation. He saw my every struggle, every illness, every moment of vulnerability as a calculated performance for attention, for narcissistic supply directed at Grandpa. Mark, please just leave. I'm tired. My voice was barely a squeak. I felt my lungs starting to burn. The air felt thinner even with the cannula. That's when he did it. With a swift, almost imperceptible movement, his hand shot out, not to comfort, not to check on me, but to the clear tube snaking from the oxygen concentrator to my nose. A click, a soft, disturbing psht of air. My breath hitched. The rhythmic hum of the machine didn't change, but the feeling in my nose, in my chest, changed instantly. The subtle pressure of the oxygen was gone, replaced by nothing, just stale hospital air. There, he said, stepping back, a smirk playing on his lips. Let's see how much of a faker you really are when the props are gone. My eyes widened in terror. I tried to speak, but only a gurgle escaped. My lungs seized, a desperate, searing pain. I clawed at my chest, trying to pull in air, but it felt like breathing through a wet sponge. The room started to spin. The edges of my vision went dark. I remember a faint buzzing sound in my ears, growing louder, drowning out even the frantic pounding of my own heart. He just stood there watching, his face a mask of detached curiosity, almost satisfaction. Then, just as I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness, a nurse, thankfully, entered for a routine check, her eyes immediately fixing on the slack tube, then on my convulsing body. A scream was the last thing I heard before the blackness swallowed me whole. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. That terrifying moment in the hospital wasn't the end. It was the catalyst. It was the moment I finally, irrevocably understood that my brother was not just a sibling with a grudge, but something far more dangerous. Recovery was slow, punctuated by panic attacks and nightmares of suffocating. The hospital staff, bless them, were initially confused. They attributed the incident to a loose connection or a patient disturbance. The nurse who found me, a kind woman named Eleanor, looked at me with an extra layer of concern, a knowing glint in her eye that suggested she saw more than she was saying. Mark, of course, spun a tale of me being disoriented and pulling it out myself, a classic example of him rewriting history to fit his narrative. But I knew. I remembered his eyes. I remembered the exact words. It was during these long, quiet hours, confined to the bed, the constant hum of the new oxygen machine, a reminder of my fragility, that my own forensic descent began. It wasn't about digital breadcrumbs at first, not directly. It was about reconstructing the scene. I had nothing but my memory, so I started with that. Every detail. The angle of the bed, the position of the oxygen concentrator, the precise path of the tubing, Mark's cologne, the time. I asked Eleanor, the nurse, about the shift changes, the hospital's policy on visitor logs, security cameras. She was hesitant, but her kindness, Her quiet empathy shone through. She offered small, non committal answers, but in her eyes I saw suspicion. Honey, she'd said one evening, adjusting my pillow with a practiced hand. Things like that don't just happen. Machines don't just disconnect themselves. Not in a room with a patient as aware as you. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. We have cameras in the hallways, of course, for security, and visitor logs are standard. This was my first true thread. My mind, though weak from illness, started to race. The problem was I was trapped. I couldn't investigate. My phone was dead, charging across the room out of reach. I needed help. That's when I remembered Liam, a tech savvy friend from college, a brilliant, cynical whirlwind of algorithms and conspiracy theories. He was the kind of person who could find the metadata on a blurry photo of a cat from 2008. I managed to get a nurse to let me use her phone for a quick call. Liam, I croaked, I need your help. Something bad happened. Something Mark did. I gave him the bare bones of the story: the oxygen, Mark's presence, my near death. Liam was quiet for a long moment. He tried to kill you, didn't he? He stated, not asked. The bluntness of it, hearing it from someone else, hit me like a physical blow. A wave of nausea washed over me. I don't know what to think. I lied, even to him, the insidious doubt still clinging to me. But I need proof. I need to know for sure. Liam was methodical. Okay, first things first, hospital. They have security footage, they have visitor logs. What time did this happen? Who was on shift? What's the name of the hospital? What's your room number? I rattled off everything I could remember. I'll try to get eyes on it. It won't be easy. Hospitals are Fort Knox with that stuff. The next few days were a blur of recovery and covert operations. Liam, my silent shadow witness, started his work. He couldn't legally access anything, of course, but Liam had a knack for social engineering and finding open source intelligence. He started by calling the hospital, posing as a frantic, distant relative, trying to verify visiting hours, asking about specific staff members, subtly probing about recent incidents or technical difficulties in the wing. He checked public records for any reported incidents at the hospital around that time, looking for patterns. He even tracked my brother's general movements using publicly available data, social media posts, though Mark was private, his friends weren't, and geolocation if he'd left it on by accident. The real breakthrough came a week later, after I was discharged and back in my own apartment, still tethered to a portable oxygen machine. Liam showed up at my door, looking harried but triumphant, carrying a battered laptop. The hum of my new machine filled the quiet space, a constant mechanical breath. It's not direct proof, Nima, but it's circumstantial and damning, he said, placing the laptop on my coffee table, the worn wood surface reflecting the harsh glare of the screen. He pulled up a series of screenshots. Hospital visitor logs. Official. You need a bad scan to get in and out of secured wings after hours. He pointed to a timestamp. Look, Mark checks in at 8:12 p.m. Standard visitor pass. Your incident was recorded by the nurse at 8:45 p.m. Then, look here. Mark checks out at 8:51 p.m. He was in your wing for 39 minutes. No other visitors were logged for your room during that specific window or even in your immediate vicinity. Okay, but that doesn't prove anything, I whispered, my heart pounding. He could say he just left. Exactly, Liam nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Which is why we need more. I tried to get a hold of the security footage, but that's locked down tighter than Area 51 without a subpoena. However, I did find something interesting. This hospital has a new, smart system for monitoring medical equipment. It's supposed to detect malfunctions, disconnections, things like that. It's in beta apparently, but it logs everything. He zoomed in on another graph. It looked like a complicated medical chart. See this? This is your oxygen flow rate. He pointed to a series of steady wavy lines. Normal. Then at precisely 8:46 p.m., a sharp, almost vertical drop. Not a gradual decline, not a fluctuation, but a sudden total cessation of flow, followed by an immediate alarm trigger in the system at 8:47 pm. Then the flow resumes, albeit a bit erratically, as they reconnected you. This isn't a loose connection, Badi. This is someone disconnecting it. He continued, his voice calm, clinical, yet filled with a righteous anger. I also found an internal incident report filed by Nurse Eleanor. She detailed finding you hypoxic, gasping for air, the cannula disconnected. She also noted something unusual. She mentioned seeing a tall male figure rushing out of the wing, matching Mark's description, just moments before she entered your room. She didn't know who he was at the time, just that his hurried departure struck her as odd because visitors weren't supposed to be in that part of the hospital after hours without prior arrangement. He leaned back, the laptop screen casting a pale blue glow on his face. This isn't just about he said, she said. This is hard data, timestamps, system logs, witness observations. It builds a very strong forensic picture. My hands were shaking as I looked at the charts. The cold, impartial lines of data spoke volumes. They validated my terror, my memories. They ripped away the last vestiges of doubt, of the sunk cost fallacy that had kept me invested in the idea that my brother wasn't truly malevolent, that he was just misunderstood or struggling. No, this was deliberate. This was an attempt on my life. The thought made me gag, a bitter taste rising in my mouth. So, what now? I asked, my voice barely audible above the whir of the oxygen machine. Grandpa's will reading, Liam said simply. It's tomorrow. That's why he did it, wasn't it? He wanted you out of the picture. He wanted to make sure he was the sole heir, or at least the favored one. The irony wasn't lost on me. He tried to take my breath to ensure his inheritance, and in doing so, he set in motion the very events that would lead to his downfall. The next day, the air in the lawyer's office was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of lemon polish. Grandpa's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man whose glasses perpetually seemed to be sliding down his nose, sat behind the large mahogany desk. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight slicing through the tall, narrow windows, illuminating the heavy legal texts lining the walls. Mark was there, of course, looking impeccably dressed, a smirk of self satisfaction barely concealed. He caught my eye and offered a sickly sweet, pitying smile, the kind that screamed, "Poor dear, still recovering? Such a fragile thing." He clearly believed his narrative, his gaslighting, had worked. My parents were there too, stiff and uncomfortable, clearly aware of the tension between us, but always choosing to ignore it, or, in my mother's case, to subtly side with Mark. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the hushed room. He began to read Grandpa's will, a long, formal document filled with legalese. My mind wandered, replaying Liam's charts, the cold logic of the timestamps. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, insistent drum. I clutched the armrest of my chair, the velvet surprisingly soft beneath my clammy palms. The will detailed various small bequests to charities, a distant cousin, and a beloved housekeeper. Then came the substantial parts. Grandpa had been a shrewd businessman, and his estate was considerable. Mark sat up straighter, a smug look spreading across his face, clearly expecting his name to be called next, as it always had been, the golden child, the rightful heir. "And to my dear grandson, Mark Anthony," Mr. Henderson read, his voice devoid of emotion. "I bequeath a sum of $100,000 along with my collection of antique stamps as a token of my enduring affection." Mark's jaw dropped slightly. 100,000? That was peanuts compared to the true value of the estate. His face flushed a deep crimson. He looked at me, a flicker of bewildered fury in his eyes, as if blaming me for this unexpected insult. Mr. Henderson continued, unfazed. "And to my beloved granddaughter, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my primary residence, all financial holdings, and the family business, with the stipulation that the business be managed by a mutually agreed upon third party for a period of no less than 5 years, ensuring its stability. A gasp rippled through the room. My mother looked aghast. My father looked stunned. Mark looked like he'd been struck by lightning. What? Practically shrieked, jumping to his feet, overturning his delicate teacup which shattered on the polished floor. The smell of cold tea and porcelain shards filled the air. That's impossible. Grandpa would never. I was always his favorite. I did everything for him. Mr. Henderson remained impassive. Mr. Cools, there are further provisions. Provisions? What provisions could possibly justify this travesty? Mark was incandescent with rage, his carefully constructed composure crumbling in an instant. This was the moment I saw the true, raw, narcissistic injury. Indeed, Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his glasses. It is stated here, in a codicil dated just 3 weeks ago, that should any heir be found to have engaged in actions jeopardizing the life or well being of another named heir, particularly my granddaughter, Buna, with malicious intent, then said heir shall forfeit their claim to any significant portion of my estate beyond the initial token bequest. Mark stared at the lawyer, then at me, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He knew, he must have known, instinctively, that this was about that day. This is ridiculous, he sputtered, his voice cracking. What actions? What are you talking about? She's always been frail, always sick. She probably just hallucinated something. On the contrary, Mr. Henderson said, a hint of steel in his voice now. He glanced at the door. Grandpa, in his wisdom, anticipated such a response. He requested that a witness be present for the reading of this particular codicil. The door to the office, heavy and panelled, slowly opened. A man stepped in. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He wore a crisp suit and his demeanor exuded quiet authority. It was Dr. Aris Thorne, one of the leading pulmonologists at St. Jude's, the very surgeon who had overseen my most critical recovery days. My blood ran cold. This wasn't Liam's evidence, which was critical but circumstantial. This was the bombshell. The room fell silent, save for the faint whir of my portable oxygen machine, a stark reminder of why we were all here. Dr. Thorne walked calmly to a vacant chair Mr. Henderson indicated and sat down. His presence alone was an indictment. Mark, for the first time, looked genuinely terrified, his face paling to an ashen grey. Dr. Thorne, Mr. Henderson prompted, would you mind reiterating your findings as requested by Mr. before his passing and as confirmed by your subsequent investigations? Dr. Thorne looked directly at Mark, his gaze unwavering, compassionate yet firm. Certainly, Mr. Mark. On the evening of date, at approximately 8:46 p.m., while your sister was in critical condition and dependent on supplemental oxygen, hospital records, corroborated by the smart monitoring system for medical devices, show a deliberate, abrupt cessation of oxygen flow to her cannula. This was not a malfunction. This was a physical disconnection. Furthermore, nurse Eleanor Vance, who discovered nurse in a state of severe hypoxia minutes later, identified you as the individual she observed rapidly exiting the patient wing at that precise time. He continued, his voice steady, clinical, yet devastating. My own review of medical charts from that evening indicated a sudden precipitous drop in blood oxygen saturation levels, consistent with complete respiratory deprivation, necessitating emergency intervention. This event significantly prolonged her recovery and could very easily have been fatal. Grandpa was gravely concerned about this incident. He had requested a full discreet investigation from the hospital, which included reviewing all available data, visitor logs, security footage of the wing, which, though grainy, showed clear footage of Mr. Mark entering and exiting the room within the critical time frame, and Nurse Vance's detailed incident report. which she subsequently updated with her identification of you. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. Grandpa was presented with all this evidence. He was deeply distressed. He recognized this as a deliberate act of malice, an attempt to gravely harm his granddaughter for financial gain. He then made the codicil to his will, explicitly stating that anyone who would attempt such a thing should be disinherited, citing moral turpitude and a fundamental breach of familial trust. The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. Mark stood there, frozen, his face a mask of abject horror and furious disbelief. The color had completely drained from his face. His carefully constructed world, built on lies and manipulation, had just been systematically dismantled. The golden child exposed. You lying bastard! Mark finally screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Dr. Thorne, then at me. This is a setup. You always hated me, both of you. She's a faker. She always was. She deserved it. She's always trying to take what's mine. He lunged forward, not at me, but at Mr. Henderson's desk, scattering papers, his eyes wild. He was restrained by my father, who, for the first time in his life, seemed to be prioritizing someone else over Mark. My mother, usually Mark's staunchest defender, simply stared, her face pale, her lips trembling. The weight of Dr. Thorne's professional, unimpeachable testimony, backed by the cold, hard forensic evidence Grandpa had painstakingly gathered, was too much. It shattered her denial. Mark was eventually escorted out, his rage devolving into pathetic, desperate accusations and threats. He was screaming about lawyers, about injustice, about how he would expose her lies. But his words were hollow, ringing in the suddenly empty space, devoid of any power. He had lost everything. Not just the inheritance, but his standing, his reputation, his family. The narcissist's greatest fear: exposure. Sitting there, the hum of my oxygen machine, a steady, comforting presence, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, a profound, bone-deep vindication. The gaslighting, the years of doubt, the constant questioning of my own reality, it was all stripped away. The truth, ugly and painful, stood revealed. But there was no joy. There was no triumphant feeling of winning. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. This was messy, brutal, and left deep, festering wounds. Grandpa, in his final act of protection, had exposed the monster in our family. But at what cost? Our family was shattered, irrevocably broken. The knowledge that my own brother had tried to end my life, not in a fit of passion, but with cold, calculated intent for money, was a scar that would never truly heal. The inheritance, substantial as it was, felt tainted, a monument to a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. This was the true cost of winning: the emotional war, the unraveling of everything you thought you knew, and the chilling realization that some battles leave no victors, only survivors with permanent scars. So, here I am. The air in my lungs feels real now, fully mine, unthreatened. But the moral question remains, heavy in the silence of this Reddit post. Was Grandpa's final act of justice truly just? Was it right to expose Mark so completely, to ruin him, even for attempting to take my life? Or does the emotional toll, the irreparable damage to a family, make the victory a hollow one? Was the precise forensic takedown of a malicious sibling worth the permanent gaping wound it left behind? I genuinely don't know. What do you think, Reddit? If this story shocked you, hit that like button right now, because stories like this need to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe for more real, jaw-dropping drama that exposes the truth behind toxic relationships and hidden betrayals. Drop a comment below and tell me, was the grandfather right to destroy him, or did it go too far? And most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to see how dark family dynamics can really get.